Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the attempts by the Macedonian opposition parties to invalidate the 2017 treaty with Bulgaria by means of referendum. Now, this video is essentially part 2 of a video I put out earlier this summer in which we discussed that 2017 treaty in more detail and the protests that arose during this summer of 2022 in response to the EU's interpretation of that treaty and what that treaty means for Macedonia's EU accession process. So I would highly recommend you go watch that video first, as it will give you much more background into the facts that we're going to be discussing in today's video, and I'll put a link down to that video in the comment section. So again, highly recommend that you go watch that first. But basically, what we discussed in that previous video was how in June of 2022, the EU put forward a framework, or put forward the criteria under which Macedonia is to become an EU member. And this framework was labeled the French proposal, and it's called the French proposal because it was published during the time in which the French held the rotating presidency of the European Council, essentially. So don't get confused by the name. Even though it's called the French proposal, it is a proposal that is held by the entire European Union. But basically, what this proposal states is that in order to progress in its EU accession process, in order to become an EU member state, Macedonia must implement the terms of the treaties and agreements it has signed with EU member states, namely Greece and Bulgaria, and it must implement the terms of those agreements in good faith. Now, the two treaties or agreements in question here are the 2018 Prispa Agreement, which was signed between Macedonia and Greece, and the 2017 Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness, and Cooperation with Bulgaria. This is a agreement between Macedonia and Bulgaria. So essentially, the EU is kind of stating that Macedonia must comply with the 2017 Bulgarian Friendship Treaty, which is the treaty that is the basis for the current unrest in Macedonia. And that treaty, again, was signed by the then Prime Minister of Macedonia, Zoran Zaev, and the then Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Boyko Borisov. And that treaty, that 2017, what's called the Friendship Treaty with Bulgaria, is basically a treaty dealing with how to improve the relationship between the two states. Now, since 2017, tensions have grown after that agreement was signed due to the fact that Bulgaria has implemented a veto or a blockade against Macedonia's accession into the European Union because Bulgaria is claiming that Macedonia is not implementing the terms of that agreement in good faith. And given that all EU members must unanimously agree to the accession of new member states, Bulgaria's veto or blockade, however you want to think about it, is preventing Macedonia from becoming an EU member state, and that is the basis for the current dispute between Macedonia and Bulgaria. Now, the reason why these tensions kind of boiled over this past summer and why we saw these protests was because the European Union, through this French proposal, basically adopted the Bulgarian veto, the Bulgarian blockade, into its own framework for Macedonia's European accession. Basically, the European Union, in essence, said, listen, it's not just Bulgaria individually who's blocking you from entering the European Union because you're not implementing the terms of this 2017 Friendship Treaty in good faith, but it's now the European Union as a whole who is demanding that you adhere to the terms of that treaty, which you voluntarily entered into with one of our member states. So again, it's not just Bulgaria who's implementing a veto. That veto is now being fully incorporated by the rest of the European Union. The EU is saying, you signed this treaty, you have to adhere to its terms. So once that EU framework came out over these past few months, the response in Macedonia to that proposal was kind of split. So you have the governing coalition, which is made up by the parties SDSM and DUI, who came out and stated they are willing to implement these Bulgarian demands, again, based off that 2017 treaty, in order to move forward in the process of becoming an EU member state, while the opposition, made up of Dopamane and Levica, held protests in Skopje, calling the government's coalition traitors for giving into these Bulgarian demands in exchange for EU membership, and calling for the government to step down and for new parliamentary elections to be held. Essentially, the opposition parties are stating that EU membership is not worth giving into Bulgarian demands. Basically, what Bulgaria is demanding, which we went over again in that previous video, is things like, adding Bulgarians to the preamble of the Macedonian constitution, making essentially ethnic Bulgarians a constituent element within the Macedonian nation. Additionally, and maybe most importantly in this whole dispute between Macedonia and Bulgaria, is the fact that Bulgaria is asking the Macedonians to reform their history, to rewrite their history books. Essentially, the Bulgarians believe that the modern Macedonian historiography is appropriating aspects and elements of Bulgarian history, that it's rewriting Bulgarian history as Macedonian history, and that the current Macedonian historiography contains many falsifications that run counter to Bulgaria's national interests and whatnot. So there are also other demands that Bulgaria is making, but in essence, those are some of the disputes, and the opposition does not want to give in to these Bulgarian demands because it believes doing so will lead to the quote-unquote Bulgarization of Macedonia. They feel that these giving into these Bulgarian demands will lead to a whittling away of the Macedonian national identity, and will lead again to the Bulgarization of the ethnic Macedonians. Again, that's kind of a little bit of a background in a nutshell. I again would recommend you go watch that previous video for a more thorough and detailed explanation of what led up to the current opposition government asking for the referendum, which we'll be discussing going forward in this video. Now, since June and July, when these protests were at their peak, there have been some new developments in this whole drama. Since then, the main opposition party, again, TERMINATE, has been seeking to organize a referendum to address the issues of accepting Bulgarian demands as a prerequisite for joining the European Union. Now, since this, quote-unquote French proposal is not a statute, it's not a treaty, it's not an agreement in and of itself, the Macedonians can't really vote on whether to accept it or to terminate it directly. All the Macedonians can either do is to agree to implement the reforms in accordance with the Bulgarian treaty or not. And if not, then Macedonia will not proceed towards EU membership. Therefore, when TERMINATE, through its party leader Christian Mickoski, announced that it will be demanding a referendum on this issue, it was unclear what that referendum question would be, since again, Macedonians aren't going to vote on the French proposal per se. So it was a little bit kind of up in the air on what exactly this referendum would be in reference to. But earlier this month, September 2022, the party TERMINATE announced that the referendum would be organized around the following question, quote, "Are you in favor of abandoning the validity of the law on ratification of the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness, and Cooperation between the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria?" Now, in essence, this question is essentially asking, are you in favor of terminating or tearing up the treaty with Bulgaria? And over the past several weeks, since the question was kind of put forward, TERMINATE has been seeking to initiate the process of organizing a referendum on this question. Now, almost immediately after putting forward this referendum question, the opposition faced its first setback on its road to the referendum it is proposing. Essentially, what occurred was, when the opposition filed its parliamentary motion in regard to organizing the referendum, the Speaker of the Parliament, Talat Jaferi, who is from the ethnic Albanian party DUI, which again is part of the governing coalition which supports the French proposal, what he did was he rejected the opposition's motion for referendum, stating that it was unconstitutional because it violates Article 118 of the Macedonian Constitution. And Article 118 of the Constitution states that, quote, "International agreements ratified in accordance with the Constitution are part of the internal legal order and cannot be changed by law." So basically what Talal Jaferi is saying here is that the referendum question is unconstitutional because it deals with a topic that is essentially closed off. Therefore, there will be some sort of legal battle going forward in regard to whether a referendum of this type is constitutional. Essentially, again, whether an international agreement can be terminated by popular vote. The opposition party is attempting to do that. The governing coalition is stating it is unconstitutional. So I'm assuming that as we go forward in this path, in the opposition party's path to a referendum, this issue will most likely need to go before the Constitutional Court so they can make a ruling on whether this referendum, again, is constitutional or unconstitutional. Now, with all that being said, ultimately, I believe that the way in which the opposition is trying to challenge the French proposal is ultimately improper. It'd be one thing if the opposition, if Dupont-Monet wanted to halt the EU accession process altogether, basically stating that, you know what, these Bulgarians are too high of a price to pay for EU membership, and we don't want to go down this road any further. However, that's not the message that Dupont-Monet is putting forward. Their message, which is a bit confusing, is that it intends to invalidate the 2017 treaty with Bulgaria while still pursuing a path to EU membership, which to me is nonsensical and contradictory because the European Union, through this French proposal, has made it crystal clear that if Macedonia wishes to move forward towards EU membership, it will need to implement the terms of the 2017 Bulgaria treaty in good faith. And I don't think the European Union nor the Bulgarian government will see reneging on the agreement in its entirety as good faith compliance. Essentially stating that you want to invalidate the agreement while still moving forward with EU membership is like saying you want to jump into the ocean but you don't want to get wet. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, in my opinion, the reason why the opposition, namely Dupont-Monet, is pursuing this particular route, invalidation of the Bulgaria treaty by means of referendum, is because it knows it's meaningless and it's not going to go anywhere. I have no doubt that the party leadership of Dupont-Monet has accepted the fact that Macedonia will need to accept the Bulgarian demands if EU membership is to be achieved. And I think that Dupont-Monet is fully prepared to make those concessions. What I think is happening is that they are cynically acting as if they are in opposition to this framework in order to garner support, in order to get votes from Macedonians who are upset with the Bulgaria agreement and with the EU's French proposal. Basically, I think that Dupont-Monet is a fake opposition party seeking to channel a lot of the anger and a lot of the energy from the Macedonian population towards support for the party by promising to terminate the agreement while still seeking EU membership. I think ultimately what's going on here is that the party leadership of Dupont-Monet is leeching off of the people's discontent with this whole situation for its own benefit, for the party's benefit. At the end of the day, I think that all major parties in Macedonia are committed to EU membership, and they will do whatever it takes, including giving in to Bulgarian demands, in order to achieve that goal. I think by this point, there's enough sunk cost that in the minds of a lot of the Macedonian leadership, it simply doesn't make a lot of sense to stop at this point in the game. I mean, since 1991, the Macedonians have changed their flag, have given in to certain internal Albanian demands, have changed the name of the country from the Republic of Macedonia to the Republic of North Macedonia. And I think the thought process of a lot of the major parties in the country is, what's one more capitulation? We're almost there. If we stop now, all the previous capitulations were for nothing. And therefore, I think that at the end of the day, regardless of what political party is in power, the Macedonians will compromise with Bulgaria and will make sure that they don't get derailed on this EU accession process. So there you have it. This has been an update on what has occurred in this whole Bulgaria treaty, EU accession process drama since June of 2022, late June, early July, when the French proposal was first put forward and when the opposition protests to the French proposal began. And I will be making videos on this topic periodically as we get new developments. Recently, the Macedonian Prime Minister Dimitar Kovacevski stated that he anticipates this whole EU accession process to last until at least the year 2030. So we have plenty of time to make videos over the next several years as this process moves forward. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.